You're in.
All right, it's good to be back with you again today. I'm Rita Bailey from Lourdes Hospital, and we chose a little different topic to talk with you about today, and this is sodium or salt in your diet. How many of you know the difference between sodium and salt? Anybody?
Sodium is just an element.
It is.
Salt's
yes.
a compound.
He's had some chemistry, hadn't he? Okay. This is sodium, and the abbreviation in the chemical world is capital N, little a. Salt is actually a compound made up of two of the elements, and that is sodium and chloride. And salt substitute is two elements, potassium and chloride. Now the reason some people find that they don't like salt substitute is because potassium, if you ever had to take that as a supplement, has a bit of a bitter taste. So a lot of people try to use salt substitute like salt, so they use a lot of it, and it tastes bitter to them, and therefore they'll end up not liking it. So I recommend the use of salt substitute like the old Brill Cream commercial. Do you remember what that phrase was?
Little dab will do ya.
Little dab will do ya, yeah. I knew somebody had me as old as me around here. Little dab will do ya. You can always add more, but you can't take away once you put it on there. The other number that I've illustrated on here is just a Rita's number. It's not a scientific or textbook number. But people are always asking me, how much is too much sodium in my food? So just to give you a rule of thumb to judge by, I recommend that you cut it off at 250 milligrams of sodium per serving. So as we talk today, you'll see what that 250 comes into play. Sodium is actually found in everything that we eat, but it's in lower amounts in our natural food. It's when we start processing food and adding salt that it starts to become a problem. Now, why would the doctor recommend people not use a lot of salt? What effect does it have on our body? Well, sodium is part of our fluid balance, and if we have too much sodium in our body recognizes it's too concentrated, so it will try to dilute that out by holding on to fluid. You ever heard the expression edema, where people have a lot of swelling? As we get older, our bodies are not nearly as efficient as they were when we were younger. So you young guys can probably eat too much sodium, and it's okay because your body will just excrete the extra. It's excreted through the urine. But as we get older, we're less efficient at everything. We retain a lot of sodium, and the body tries to rectify that by holding on to fluid. If you have a weaker heart muscle, we refer to that as congestive heart failure, then you're not pumping, your heart is not pumping as forcefully. So the blood will get down to your toes, and it starts to slow down before it makes that return trip, and that's when the fluid might start seeping out into your ankles. We also would recommend staying away from salt if you have a kidney problem, because the kidneys have to excrete the extra. If you have any kind of liver problems, I'd recommend you stay away from salt. And bottom line is, even a healthy person only needs 200 milligrams of sodium a day. Do you want to guess how much the average American eats?
2,800.
Actually, it's about 6,000. Yeah. Now, we need 200. We're eating about 6,000, and there are probably some of us who are above average. I know as a Southerner, born and raised in the South, my mother would open a can of green beans, which already have salt in them. We would salt them in the pan, and then the family would start to salt them again at the table before we even tasted them. Have you seen people do that? Salt their food before they even taste it? So really what we're liking is the taste of salt, and we get a hint of flavor behind that. To make that transition to getting away from salt, you learn to appreciate the real flavor of the food without the salt being in between. But we're going to talk about some specifics right now. Let's start with the salt shaker itself. This container tells you that a serving of salt is 1/4 of a teaspoon, and that has 590 milligrams of sodium. So a teaspoon of sodium, and remember that the teaspoon is the small version, not the tablespoon, the teaspoon. It's about 2,500 milligrams of sodium. What about sea salt? What do you think?
It's got more sodium.
Doesn't have more, but it does have 590 milligrams of sodium per 1/4 of a teaspoon. So it's exactly the same. But because of the fact that this has been marketed a lot, it's mentioned on TV a lot, being promoted, a lot of chefs recommend it, people got the impression that it was a better product. I've had so many patients tell me, and when I'm talking to them about their diet and counseling them, oh, don't worry, I don't use salt, I use sea salt. And then I have to explain to them that there's no difference. It's the same sodium content. So just keep that in mind. If you hear anybody talking about they use sea salt as if it's better for them, it is not. Then they have products like this one called Salt Sense, which has 1/3 less sodium. So if you were just trying to cut back, maybe these healthy guys over here trying to cut back just to start weaning themselves, then that might be all right. But if anybody has been advised by their physician to stay away from salt, reduce the sodium in their diet, this would not be a good product. It's only 1/3 less. What would you probably end up doing? Sprinkle just a little bit more so you still get the same amount of sodium. And the same thing is true of light products. Light salt is 50% less sodium, but again, it's not recommended for anyone who's on a salt-restricted diet because people just use a little bit more of it, and still there's really not a lot of control that way. Now, salt substitutes are out there, and they're okay to use because they contain no sodium. They do have the potassium chloride. The problem is, as I said earlier, can taste bitter. There is one recommendation where I would not use salt substitute, and that's if you have any kind of kidney problems. People with kidney problems are not excreting the potassium like they should, so they build up too much, and these products do contain potassium, so you would not want to use it if you have a kidney issue. Also, you may be on a particular medication which is called potassium sparing. It holds on to potassium, so if you're on those medicines, and they'll tell you on that information that comes home from the drugstore, so always read that you should not use salt substitute or high potassium foods, but otherwise it's okay to use those. So what can you use to flavor your food? Because if you don't put anything in it, it's going to taste pretty blah. Well, there are lots of choices. You might just go to your own cabinet or your garden and get out the herbs and the spices, and it could be garlic, it could be bay leaf, pepper, different flavors of pepper, the white pepper, the red pepper, black pepper. It can be rosemary, thyme, cumin. There's all kinds of herbs and spices. Just make sure you're not using garlic salt, celery salt, onion salt, sea salt, seasoned salt, because those still are salt, but a lot of people don't realize that. If you want to take the quicker way, you can use products like Mrs. Dash. Mrs. Dash is already mixed up for you. It's a combination of spices and herbs. I think they have like 11 different flavors of it, and this is just easy and simple. The original Mrs. Dash, I believe this was the original one. This one's onion and herb, and this one's garlic and herb. It's a little coarse, and some people complained about it was kind of gritty. They didn't like that texture. So they made a finer blend, a table blend as they call it, but it's a finer texture, and so that makes it easy for those folks who didn't care for that one. These products can be kind of pricey. They run close to $3 for that small container. So I do recommend this product, which I found at Big Lots. It's called No Salt Seasoning. Doesn't have salt or salt substitute in it. Basically, it's a generic version of Mrs. Dash, and it only costs $1 for the larger container. So if you want to just try something and start seeing if you can start weaning yourself a little bit off of salt, you might want to consider using products like that. Now, having talked about salt, I have a lot of patients who say, I don't use salt. I'm a salt-restricted diet, have been for years. Well, that's great. Do you ever eat anything like bologna or ham or hot dogs? Oh, yeah, every day. Well, unfortunately, that means they're not on a salt-restricted diet at all, because the average slice of bologna is 500 milligrams of sodium. Average hot dog is 500 milligrams of sodium. Now, what do you do when you have hot dog or bologna? Sometimes you have more than one, right? You might have a couple of hot dogs or a couple of slices of bologna. What's good on your ham or bologna sandwich? Cheese, of course, which is also high in sodium. It runs 400 to 500 per slice. And then what do we like to put on there? Well, maybe a little mustard. Now, condiments also have salt in them. A lot of people don't realize that. 1 tablespoon of mustard is 300 milligrams of sodium. 1 tablespoon of ketchup is 150 milligrams of sodium. I've had patients say, oh, I don't use salt, I used to use ketchup. And then I've seen kids go up and ask for 8 packages of ketchup in McDonald's, getting a lot of salt with that usage. So talking about condiments, let's compare the steak sauces. This is the thicker version, and it has, as a serving is 1 tablespoon, has 280 milligrams of sodium. Now, my recommended cutoff is 250, so just keep that in mind. And you might use more than 1 tablespoon of steak sauce. The thinner version, the Worcestershire sauce, says a teaspoon is a serving, and it only has 60 milligrams of sodium. So even if you used a tablespoon, that's only 180. So if you were really careful, you might get by with using some of this and still get a little bit of that salty taste. What do you think about soy sauce?
Probably 500 per serving.
Even worse.
Sure.
A tablespoon of soy sauce is 1,000 milligrams of sodium. Now, I've seen recipes for Chinese dishes that call for half a cup. That's 8 tablespoons. That's 8,000 milligrams of sodium in that half cup. And then a lot of us add more soy sauce at the table when it's served to us. And they also use monosodium glutamate. in a lot of Chinese dishes. Matter of fact, the food is so high in sodium that the American Journal of American Medical Association has a diagnosis called Chinese restaurant syndrome, because people would show up at the emergency room thinking they were having a stroke. They were experiencing numbness and tingling in their fingertips and around their mouth, and it was nothing more than they'd had so much sodium in that Chinese food. And that's true of Japanese food as well. And when I eat at those places, I watch them put all that soy sauce on there and the salt, and even though they make a fancy thing of it, it's still sodium, high sodium. So, processed foods, like your bologna, ham, hot dogs. What about our breakfast meats? Now, I work on the heart floor, and a lot of my patients say, they didn't send me any meat for breakfast. And I say, well, they're probably not going to as long as you're on a cardiac diet either. One slice of bacon is about 100 milligrams of sodium. We're not even talking about fat today, we're just talking about the salt in it. And so that's not too bad, that's my 250 cutoff. But did you ever see anybody just eat one piece of bacon? You wouldn't even mess up a skillet for that, would you? So you're probably getting a lot more sodium when you eat your 3 or 4 slices of bacon. And sausage usually runs about 200 per patty. Then what do we like to do with the grease that's left over from the bacon and the sausage? Well, of course, you make gravy from it, and you're going to eat that on top of your biscuits. Or you're going to put it in your vegetables and season with it, so we get more salt that way as well. Some people are also confused by labels like Healthy Choice or Light, some of the names that we call these products, which imply to us that it's a much better product. In the case of Healthy Choice, it's usually referring to lower calorie and lower fat, a little bit less sodium, but not salt-free. This hot dog, compared to the 500 in these, runs about 320. So again, you still couldn't eat several of them, and it's still a little bit over what I recommended as the cutoff. Canned foods is another concern, because most things when they're canned are also salted. Even when you do home canning, usually the rule of thumb is to use a teaspoon of salt in every quart of vegetables or whatever you're putting up. So let's look at tuna. This is what I'm going to refer to as regular tuna. It's packed in oil. It's the regular price when back then this was 69 cents. And it had 310 milligrams of sodium in a serving. So it's a little bit above what I recommended, but the other tricky part of this is, you know what they call a serving? 1/3 of this can. So if you only ate a third of a can, you're getting 310, but if you ate the whole can, you're getting, what, 930? So it's a lot more sodium than what you might think. So what if we switch to water packed? A lot of people use water packed tuna anyway, assuming that water means fresh water, and in this case it's still salt water. So the same amount of sodium content, 310 for a third of the can. Now, there's also light. What about light? What does that mean? That's where it gets tricky. Light can mean a lot of different things. In the past, light can mean it was lighter in color. It was sliced thinner. You know, it might mean lower calorie. It doesn't necessarily mean low sodium, so be careful in that. This one, a third of a can, 310 milligrams of sodium. So it's a little lower in calories, just like the water pack was. You're going to pay more for it because they call it light, and yet you're getting the same sodium content and same calories in it. Now, the good news is they do make lots of forms of reduced sodium tuna. This one's called low sodium, low fat. This one's called 50% less salt, and that's called low sodium. So if you do need to watch your sodium, and tuna is something you really like, you might consider using these products. And they're going to run less than about 180 to 100 milligrams of sodium in a serving of those. This is one of my favorites to talk about, and that's sauerkraut. Do you know how to make sauerkraut? Anybody ever had sauerkraut made? Well, you know it's cabbage. And the way you make kraut is you put salt on it. So it's just cabbage and salt. But on my label it says this only has 190 milligrams of sodium in a serving. Now that can be pretty misleading for somebody who really likes kraut, and I said 250 is the cutoff. Do you know what the trick is? This can's supposed to feed 13 people. Now that's how they can adjust their numbers and make them work for them. I'm sorry, I eat a whole lot more than a 13th of this can. So watch your serving size and what they call a serving. Now most of your canned vegetables are going to contain salt. The good news is, and especially this time of year, fresh vegetables do not have salt added to them. They're fresh from the garden. The natural sodium content's less than 10. Frozen vegetables usually do not have any salt in them, so you can use fresh or frozen, or you can buy salt-free canned vegetables. They're available now, and they're just mixed in with the regular vegetables, and it's not 3 times more expensive like it used to be. The average serving is listed as a half a cup, and there's 350 milligrams of sodium in a half cup. Again, I eat more than a half cup of green beans, one of my favorites, so I'm probably eating at least a cup, so I'm getting 700 milligrams of sodium in a serving. And that doesn't count any salt that's added to it when it's season. But the good news is, Big Lots, Walmart, a lot of these companies now make salt-free vegetables that are not expensive. Some people used to think that the quality was inferior if it was salt-free. I think just the opposite's true. They want to make sure it's good quality, so without salt it still preserves well. So you're not taking a lower quality product when you get a salt-free vegetable. What about what I call fisherman's food? Anybody ever take that fishing because it doesn't have to be refrigerated and all that? Okay. Sodium content listed on this package is 490 milligrams. Well above what I said, almost twice what I recommended. You know what the other trick is?
How many servings?
2 or 3.
2.5 servings. So if you shared this 2.5 ways, it's 490. Otherwise, if you ate the whole can, which most people obviously would do, 2.5 times that, so it's 1,225 milligrams of sodium. Fat content was 10 for 1 serving, so that ends up being 25 grams of fat in the can. So what I really call these are salted fat sticks. Just eating salted sticks. Soup is about 800 milligrams of sodium in a small bowl. Some of you eat 2 bowls, so you're getting about 1,600. Another word of caution is a lot of people use canned soups to make casserole dishes. You know, the green bean casserole and broccoli casseroles and all those. Use cream of mushroom or cream of chicken soups. So you may be getting salt in those and don't even think about it. They do make salt-free soups. I'll be honest with you, the chicken noodle soup salt-free is pretty blah. The tomato's not too bad. It has a tomato, sort of a sweet taste, so it's not so bad. But a lot of people prefer to make their own and use lots of herbs and spices and other kinds of seasoning in them. Anything that's quick and easy and convenient, what I call heat and eat foods, is already salted. So all you had to do was warm it up. You didn't have to salt it because so someone else did it for you. Here's an example. This is the chili. It has 1,000 milligrams of sodium in that small bowl. Here's a beef stew. This has 1,180 milligrams of sodium in 1 serving. And what about chips, things that we've had today? This 1 single serving has 320 milligrams of sodium, and the chips have 270 milligrams of sodium. Now, one way around that is maybe you don't eat the whole bag, so you save calories, fat, and sodium, but you still got a little bit. Pretzels do also have quite a bit of sodium. They're in the 400 range, but you can buy salt-free pretzels. What about things like ramen noodles or these kinds of instant mixes? 1,310 milligrams of sodium, and sometimes more than that. Here's a quick and easy macaroni and cheese. 1 serving is 760 milligrams of sodium. So, and some vegetable juices. Fruit juices are low sodium. Fruit's low in sodium, but vegetable juices, they usually add salt to them. What do people do usually with their tomato juice as well? Resalt it, right? That's just typical. So this one has 590 milligrams of sodium, and then we have V8 juice, and it has 430 milligrams of sodium. But the good news is they make them low sodium. So you can buy low sodium tomato juice and V8 juice if you use that for, to drink or as a soup base or whatever. They do make it low sodium. Or again, you can make your own and start from scratch with fresh things. So the 3 categories of foods that are extremely high sodium that we recommend you avoid if you have high blood pressure, congestive heart failure, fluid problems, kidney problems, liver problems, would be anything you can see the salt on, like crackers, potato chips, pretzels, nuts, and popcorn. Anything that's in a saltwater solution, like sauerkraut, pickles, and olives. And all those processed foods like ham, bologna, hot dogs, lunch meats, cheeses, and then all the meat foods, all the ones like TV dinners, pot pies, and pizzas. But all you have to do is warm it up. It is already salted.
Is there anything left?
Fresh meats, you can still have hamburgers, steak, hot roast, pork chops, chicken, turkey, fish, all your fresh vegetables, all your fresh fruits. Regular bread is not that high in sodium. It runs about 120 milligrams of sodium. Regular margarine is about 50 milligrams of sodium per teaspoon. So you could use the regular margarine in seasoning those salt-free vegetables. So if milk and most of your beverages are low sodium. One of the first places I started with cutting back was my products like cantaloupe and watermelon. You took a bite and salted, took a bite and salted. Now I wonder why I ever did that, because it's sweet. Why would I want to salt something that's sweet? So pick something to start with that you start cutting back on. I did notice when I stopped seasoning the canned vegetables, that when I would go to a potluck and someone had seeds in them, I would notice it was a little saltier than what I was used to. So if you can do it in stages, it'll be a lot easier. That if you ever do have to go on a salt-restricted diet, it'll be a little easier. One statistic I shared with the other group is that I was reading that if you do not have high blood pressure or hypertension by the time you're 50, your chances are like 95% that you will have it before you die. So it sounds like most of us are going to get it. A lot of different reasons are thought for that. One is that maybe we are just eating so much salt and that's leading to this problem. Another is that as we age, things change, and one of those is that your kidney shrinks. It gets smaller in size. Our arteries narrow, and all these things are going to be contributing to high blood pressure. So to maybe delay those problems or prevent those problems is always a good idea to start cutting back on salt. Why do we use salt? When did we start using salt? It's like a bad habit that's like, you started years ago before you had any choice. You probably started eating salt as soon as you started eating table food. And even before that, they put salt in baby food. Mother tasted the baby food. If she didn't like it, she wouldn't feed it to the child, so they salted the baby food. Then when they became more educated that wasn't good for babies' little bitty kidneys, they stopped doing that. But we had already developed that habit by the time we were at the table eating food. Historically, they stopped using or started using salt because
Preservative, yeah.
it was a preservative. If Dad killed a deer and he wanted to feed the family during the winter, didn't want it to spoil, didn't have refrigeration, so they would cure that meat so that it would last. And that's just a habit we've passed down from generations. And it is true, you can't eat just one. Salt makes us want to eat more, and manufacturers want you to buy their products, so they salt it so that you like it and will buy it and continue to eat it. But it's a habit that we all need to consider cutting back on because we're taking in more than we really need. Any other questions? Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you again today.